two little twin boys stood silently in the park, trying to sell their worn-out toy car to help save their mother from a deadly illness. Passers-by just shook their heads and walked away, until a man in an expensive suit stopped. He didn't know it yet, but just a few hours later, the lives of that mother and her two sons would change forever. And then, a Tesla quietly pulled up in front of their house. That afternoon, New York felt colder than usual. Early spring winds swept through the corners of Brooklyn, urging everyone indoors, where heaters hummed and mugs of cocoa steamed in cozy kitchens. But in a small park tucked between the streets, two little twin boys sat curled up on a piece of cardboard, bundled in faded hoodies. In front of them sat a box holding just one item, an old red toy car. The car no longer gleamed like it did when it was new. One side mirror was scratched, and the back wheel was a bit loose, but you could tell it had once been a prized possession. Taped to the box was a sheet of paper with shaky handwriting. For sale, $10. Please help our mom. Liam and Lucas, just 8 years old, had already learned their first hard lesson about life's unfairness. They didn't beg. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. They simply sat there, holding each other for warmth, waiting for someone to stop. A few passers-by glanced their way. An elderly woman paused, offered a sad smile, then moved on. A man in a rush checked his watch and shook his head. Most just walked by, as if the boys weren't even there. "Do you think Mom's gonna be okay?" Lucas whispered, his tiny hand clutching his brother's. Liam nodded, his voice steady but his eyes shimmering. "She will. She said once she gets the surgery, she'll get better. We just have to get enough money." The two boys had no idea that across the street, a sleek black Rolls-Royce had just come to a stop. A man stepped out, wearing a gray overcoat, dark sunglasses covering nearly half his face. Jack Donovan, the man Fortune magazine once dubbed the Steel Titan of Wall Street, had no reason to stop for two poor kids on a chilly afternoon. But he did, because in that split second, Liam's eyes struck something in his chest, a silent, forceful punch straight to the heart. He walked over, said nothing, just stared at the toy car. We only need $10, sir," Liam said, voice trembling but firm. Jack reached into his wallet, pulled out a thick stack of bills, $1,000, folded it, and placed it in the box. Both boys' jaws dropped. "Thank you, sir," Lucas stammered. Jack gave a small nod. Then he turned and walked away, but not toward the car. No one could have known what was stirring in his mind at that moment, a strange mix of curiosity, concern, and a rare, unfamiliar warmth. Because Liam's eyes, the boy selling a red toy car, reminded him of something he'd buried long ago. Something that could change everything. The third-floor apartment in the rundown building on Flatbush Avenue didn't have a doorbell, just a handwritten note taped to the peeling wooden door. Knock twice, then once. It was the signal Liam and Lucas had left for the landlord, in case their mother was too weak to answer. That evening, just as dusk settled in, a silver Tesla quietly pulled into the lot in front of the complex. Jack Donovan turned off the engine and sat motionless for a long time, both hands gripping the steering wheel. He didn't know why he'd come. A CEO who had built an entire financial empire couldn't explain why the eyes of a little boy had altered his path. By now, he should have been seated at a dinner with Japanese investors at the Four Seasons. Instead, he found himself staring up at the third floor of a crumbling building, where the hallway lights flickered and the wooden stairs creaked with every step. "Just to look," he muttered to himself, then stepped out of the car. As he reached the door, he didn't even have time to knock. The door flung open. Lucas, eyes still swollen from crying, shouted in a panic, "Sir! Mom's gasping for air!" He didn't have time to react before Liam ran out of the apartment and bumped into him. What are you doing here, sir?" Jack stepped back slightly, like he'd been caught doing something he couldn't explain. "I was just passing by. I saw you two here and—" "Liam," Rachel's voice called out from the bedroom, weak but filled with panic. Liam didn't say another word. He grabbed his brother's hand and rushed inside. Jack hesitated for a second, then, driven by something he couldn't name, stepped into the apartment, the smell of antiseptic mixed with damp air. In the small room, there was just one old iron bed where a young woman, Rachel, lay drenched in sweat, her breathing fast and shallow, like she was climbing an invisible hill. Jack stepped forward and knelt by the bed. "You need a doctor," he said. Not a suggestion, but a command that surprised even himself. Rachel tried to lift her head, her lips barely moving. I don't have insurance. Don't worry, Jack said as he stood and pulled out his phone. I'll call an ambulance. I'll cover everything. Rachel started to protest, but when she looked into Liam's eyes, filled with hope and trembling with fear, she stopped. Thank you, sir, she whispered. For the first time in years, Jack felt something soften in his chest. And when the ambulance roared into the night with two little boys sitting at either side of their mother, and Jack standing silently beneath the streetlight, he knew he could never go back to being the man he was before. Brooklyn Mercy Hospital had that familiar antiseptic smell Liam and Lucas had only seen in old TV dramas, never in real life. But now, it was all they had left of their mother, Rachel. That cold, sterile air was strange, but it carried a flicker of hope. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance. Rachel was wheeled in on a metal stretcher, IV tubes dangling like parts of an alien machine. Liam held Lucas's hand tight, both boys trying to stay calm, like grown-ups. Jack Donovan walked in with them, his expensive suit speckled with rain, looking completely out of place among the casually dressed families in the waiting room. But his eyes were different now, not cold, not guarded. They held something else, responsibility, and strangely, worry. Can we stay with our mom? Lucas whispered, eyes locked on the ER doors. She's getting the best care, Jack said gently. The doctors need time. You should rest a bit. Who are you? Liam blurted out. Jack paused, realizing he didn't have a simple answer. An executive? A stranger who happened to see two boys in a park? Or a lonely man clinging to a chance at redemption he didn't fully understand himself? For now, just call me Jack, he said, then sat down beside the two boys. Time moved slowly. 1 hour, then 2. No one said much of anything. Finally, a brunette doctor with her hair tied back stepped out and removed her mask. We've stabilized Miss Rachel. She has a severe case of pneumonia, showing early signs of sepsis. It's a good thing she was brought in when she was. Liam jumped to his feet. Is our mom going to be okay? She'll need to stay here at least a week for treatment and observation, the doctor replied with a reassuring smile. But she's very lucky. Lucas gripped his brother's hand, lips trembling. Then both boys burst into tears, not from fear, but from sheer relief. Jack slowly exhaled, feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, the weight lift from his chest. You boys should get some rest now, the doctor added. There's a lounge in the back with long chairs and warm water. It's okay, Jack said, placing a hand on each boy's shoulder. How about some hot chocolate? Lucas nodded enthusiastically. Liam looked up at him, then gave a small, silent nod. And in that moment, though no one said it aloud, all three of them understood. Something had shifted. Not just in the white walls of the hospital, but in their hearts. A connection had formed, like invisible threads being stitched together by a hand none of them could see. 2 days later, on a quiet early morning still soaked in mist, Liam and Lucas stepped out of the hospital doors alongside Jack Donovan. Each boy held a steaming cup of hot cocoa in his hands. They had never seen New York look so beautiful. Or maybe they just never had the time to look up and notice. The sleek black Tesla was parked right out front, its doors lifting open like the wings of a bird. Liam's jaw dropped. You drive that? Lucas whispered, as if saying it too loud might make the car vanish. Jack gave a small smile. The car doesn't matter. What matters is where it takes you. The boys said nothing, but the sparkle in their eyes gave away their awe. Where are we going? Liam asked. Home, Jack replied. Then he paused and corrected himself. Not my home. Somewhere safe for you to stay, at least while your mom's still recovering. They climbed into the car without another word. The Tesla glided smoothly through the wide avenues, then turned into a quiet suburban neighborhood where every house had a white picket fence and a picture-perfect front yard. When the car came to a stop, Liam held his breath. A 3-story home stood before them, with wide glass windows, a gray-tiled roof, and white stone steps. No one said a word, but they all knew. They had just entered a different world. Lucas turned to Jack. You're really rich, huh? But why are you helping us? The question came so directly that it stopped Jack in his tracks. He didn't know how to answer, not because he didn't have one, but because he was afraid to say it out loud. Because I once lost something important, Jack said, his voice low. And when I saw you two, I was afraid of missing another chance. Lucas nodded slowly, as if he understood part of it. Liam gently took his brother's hand, his eyes still fixed on the unfamiliar house. Jack extended his arm. Come on! I'll show you the biggest room in the house. Well, second biggest. The biggest one's still locked. Lucas looked up, curious. Who's in there? Jack looked at him for a long moment before answering. My son. But he's gone. No one said anything after that. Only the sound of the front door opening and their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor filled the space. But even though it was their first time in a place so grand, Liam and Lucas didn't feel afraid. There was something in the way Jack looked at them, a kind of quiet reverence, as if he were seeing the final pieces to a heart that had been broken for far too long. The first night in Jack Donovan's house passed in silence. Rachel was still in the hospital, under intensive care, and Liam and Lucas lay on a soft bed, unable to sleep. The ceiling was high. The nightlight glowed a soft amber. But the silence here was different from the silence in their old run-down apartment. It felt like something was being held back, something waiting to be released. The next morning, as Jack walked down the hallway, he saw Liam standing in front of a closed door. It was painted white with a brass handle, and the bottom edge was sealed with felt, blocking out all light and dust. What's in here, sir? Liam asked softly. Jack stopped in his tracks. That's Carlos's room, he said slowly. Lucas appeared behind his brother, tilting his head. Carlos was your son? Jack nodded. He was 10 too, just like you boys. Liam looked at him for a while. I don't think Carlos would want his room to stay closed forever. It hit Jack like a punch to the chest. He had never thought of it that way. For him, locking the door had been the only way to survive the memory. That whole day, he moved like a ghost. He canceled all his meetings, didn't open his laptop. He just wandered around the house, watching the boys laugh and play in the backyard, a sight he hadn't witnessed in years. That evening, Jack stood alone in front of that door. His hand rested on the brass knob, trembling. But this time, he didn't turn away. He opened the door. Carlos's room was exactly as it had been the day he left forever. The dim glow of the automatic nightlight washed over the small bed, the desk, the bookshelf full of toy cars and dinosaurs. Everything was coated in a thin layer of dust, like a memory left untouched. Jack stepped inside, shaking. He sat at the edge of the bed, his hand brushing against a worn-out baseball cap. The familiar scent caught him off guard, and his throat tightened. Soft footsteps echoed behind him. Liam and Lucas stood at the doorway. No one had told them, but they knew. Today was something special. Carlos liked baseball, huh? Lucas asked. Jack smiled. For the first time in years, he loved it, said he was going to be a coach one day. Liam stepped in, placing a small toy car on Carlos's desk. So he has a friend. This one's mine. It's really special. Jack stared at the toy, eyes misting over. Something cracked open inside him. Not pain, but the icy shell of loneliness finally beginning to thaw. For the first time since losing his son, he didn't feel afraid to say Carlos's name. And right then, he knew. These boys hadn't just come into his life for him to help. They were here to help him live again. Rachel woke up in the stark white hospital room, her mind still foggy from the medication. She turned her head toward the window, where the midday sun slipped through the curtains. Beside the bed sat a bouquet of fresh flowers and a handwritten card. Hope today is the start of something new, Jack. She gave a faint smile. She didn't yet know exactly who that man was, but that kind of kindness, it couldn't be faked. A few hours later, a nurse let her know someone had come to visit. Jack walked in, holding a bag of fruit and a few books meant for hospital recovery. But it wasn't the gifts that caught in Rachel's throat. It was his face. Something about it stirred a strange familiarity, like she'd seen it a long time ago. Rachel, are you feeling okay? Jack asked, pulling a chair close. Rachel blinked a few times. I'm sorry, but I feel like I've met you before? Jack smiled. I don't think so. I'm just a man who happened to cross paths with two very special boys. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. In her mind, hazy images flickered. A fundraising event, a face in the crowd, and an old photo in her late husband's wallet, the one she'd looked at 100 times since the accident 3 years ago. Her heart clenched. She looked straight into Jack's eyes. Did you ever know someone named Daniel Moore? He was an engineer. Used to work at Nova Systems? Jack froze. That name, it was his best friend from college. The same friend he'd lost in the accident. The one he still felt he'd failed by not keeping their promise to build something together. Daniel Moore was my husband, Rachel said, the words leaving her mouth like a jolt of lightning. Jack was stunned silent. The air suddenly felt heavy as lead. He stood up and took a few steps toward the window. Daniel was the reason I started the company. After he died, I threw myself into work so I wouldn't have to remember. Rachel pulled a worn photo from her wallet and handed it to Jack. In the picture was Daniel, young and smiling brightly, standing with two other men. One of them was Jack, younger, but the eyes were unmistakable. He always said, "If anything ever happened, you'd be the only one he could trust," Rachel said, her voice breaking. The room fell silent. An invisible thread was suddenly reconnected, not just through the children, but from a deeper past they hadn't realized. Jack stepped closer and placed his hand over Rachel's. "I broke my promise to Daniel once. I won't do it again." Rachel began to cry. And in that moment, they both understood. Some connections aren't coincidences. They're fate. Laughter echoed brightly down the hallway of the mansion that morning. Liam and Lucas were rolling around on the carpet, playing dinosaur escape with all the excitement two 6-year-olds could muster. Jack stood at a distance, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes never leaving the boys. Nearly a week had passed since Rachel was admitted to the hospital, and he had barely left the place. But today, for the first time since the shock, Rachel had told him to go home and spend time with the boys. He didn't think he could do it. But watching the kids tangled up with each other, even pulling the security guard into their game, Jack suddenly laughed. A light, natural laugh, the kind he hadn't had in a long time. "Mr. Jack, do you know, Mom used to be really good at drawing?" Liam asked, looking up from the pile of pillows. "Really?" Jack raised his eyebrows. "Yeah, but she stopped drawing after Dad died. We want to surprise her." Lucas pulled out a box of crayons. "I drew a picture. Can you help me stick it on the window?" Jack nodded, not quite sure what the boys were up to, but just minutes later, he was standing frozen in the living room. On the large glass door facing the garden, the two boys had taped up a big sheet of paper, covered in rough but lively drawings. There was a house. There was Mom and the two boys, and a man standing between them. Salt and pepper hair, glasses, a bright smile. Clearly, it was him. "See? This is our new home." Liam grinned from ear to ear. "And that's you. But later, we're going to add a turtle too." Jack clenched his wrist, choking back words. Something inside him cracked, not in pain, but like a release. For the first time, he let his emotions flow. No control, no logic. He sank down beside the two boys and wrapped his arms tightly around them both. "Can I finish the rest of the picture?" he whispered. Lucas looked up. Jack pointed to the bottom right corner of the drawing. "Someone's missing." "Mom?" He nodded. "And if she agrees, I want the three of you here forever." The boys stared blankly. Then, as if understanding, Liam shouted, "I'll draw Mom in a wedding dress, like a princess." Jack laughed, but inside an indescribable emotion welled up. A child's drawing, an innocent promise. But to him, it was the blueprint of a future he thought he'd never have again. And for the first time in his life, Jack believed, people don't just rebuild careers. They can rebuild families, too, from the shards they thought were shattered beyond repair. The doorbell rang just as the afternoon was fading in. Jack nearly rushed into the hallway, his heart pounding. He knew who it was. The door swung open. There stood Rachel, pale but smiling. She wore a long coat, one hand gripping a bag of medicine, the other holding Liam and Lucas. The three of them stood still for a moment, then Lucas spoke up. "Mr. Jack, the doctor said Mom is better now. Can we go home yet?" No more words were needed. Jack bent down, arms open wide to embrace all three, as if letting go would make the moment vanish forever. Rachel stepped inside, eyes scanning the mansion, once strange and cold, now filled with the warmth of the children, with scribbled drawings hung all over the walls, a small turtle crawling around the room, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. Jack took her bag gently and whispered, "I've prepared a room for you. But if you're not ready yet, the kids can stay. And you." Rachel shook her head. "No, Jack, I'm staying. Not because of the comforts, but because here, I feel like I matter." Jack squeezed her hand. "I don't want you to feel indebted or tied down. I want you to feel like it's your choice." Lucas jumped in. "Mr. Jack, we choose to stay here. Mom should choose that too, right, Mom?" All three burst out laughing, and in that moment, it felt like they truly were a family. That dinner was simple but full of laughter. Liam ate while telling stories from the hospital. Mom said the doctor's shots hurt like bee stings, but she didn't cry. Rachel blinked at Jack. I was strong because I had two little bodyguards and a man standing at the door that day. Jack was silent for a moment, then stood up. He walked to a drawer, pulled out a small box, and placed it in front of Rachel. But when she opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a key. This is the key to my house. And if you're willing, I hope it will be the key to our future too. Rachel was speechless, while the two kids jumped up and down. Yay! Mom has a new home! Only if Mom agrees, Jack smiled. Rachel took the key, then looked up at him. I never thought life would take a different path, but I need time to rest. The answer was both a hesitation and a sign she wasn't ready yet. That afternoon, the lake's surface was crystal clear under the golden sunlight. The whole family went to the lakeside park at Lucas's suggestion, carrying a picnic basket and the small blue boat Jack had carefully stored in the garage. Liam and Lucas begged to get into the pool with their life jackets on. Rachel, still cautious, kept reminding them to be careful. Jack smiled kindly. I'll always keep an eye on the kids. But in just a split second, Liam turned to look for Lucas and suddenly slipped off the floating board. His life jacket, not fastened properly, slipped off, and the boy struggled in the deep water. Rachel looked away for just a second, and when she looked back, Liam had disappeared. Liam, she screamed, her heart pounding as if it dropped out of her chest. Without hesitation, Jack dove into the lake. He plunged through the freezing cold water, blindly reaching out, then grasped a small arm. He pulled Liam up, using all his strength to bring the boy back to shore. Liam's face was pale, and he wasn't moving. No, no, Rachel whispered, trembling. Jack pressed his hands firmly on the small chest, beginning CPR. For the first time since the accident years ago, he didn't think, didn't fear, didn't hesitate. He fought. Breathe, please. Just breathe, his voice cracked. 1, 2, 3 compressions, then a breath, then compressions again. Liam coughed harshly, water spilling from his mouth. The boy burst into tears, then whispered, Mom? Rachel broke down, clutching her son. Jack stepped back, pale and exhausted, but the boy was alive. Lucas, standing nearby, shakily stepped closer to Jack. He looked up, eyes red and watery. I don't know why, but I wish you were my dad. The small words were like a whisper, but they pierced straight into Jack's heart, a place locked tight for many years. For the first time, Jack cried. Tears he couldn't hold back streamed down his weathered face. Rachel looked at him. Every wall inside her seemed to crumble, not just because Jack had saved her son's life, but because he had loved them as if they'd been his own children all along. She stepped forward. Without a word, she quietly took his trembling hand. Jack looked up, meeting her gaze, gentle, sincere, and full of trust. Thank you, Rachel whispered. Not just for Liam, but for becoming the man these kids needed. The afternoon breeze blew softly. The sunlight painted the lake golden. By that water's edge, a heart was saved, and a real family was beginning to form. 3 months after that fateful day by the lake, autumn had arrived with golden leaves rustling along the path. Jack's mansion was no longer a cold fortress. It had become a home. In the kitchen, Lucas was busy making peanut butter sandwiches while Liam eagerly colored a card that read, I love you, Mom and Jack, in bright markers. Jack, wearing a flour-dusted apron, glanced at Rachel smiling warmly over her coffee. I used to think my life ended the day Carlos died, but then you and the boys showed up. Rachel placed her hand over his, her eyes full of warmth. And I thought I'd never trust anyone again, until you saved my son and taught me to believe in the impossible. That afternoon, Jack invited all three, mother and sons, to the lake, where it all began. A small boat was waiting, its sides dusted with white flowers. Petals drifted onto the water, sparkling in the sunset like healing wounds. Jack knelt down. No fanfare, no crowd, just a simple, delicate ring engraved inside with the words, Second Chances. Rachel, he spoke softly, his voice trembling, I can't promise you a perfect life, but I promise I'll never let go, come rain or shine. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. Liam and Lucas clung to her dress, excited. Mom, say yes, please. She smiled, tears falling like gentle dew. I say yes, not because you're a hero, but because you're the man my boys and I can call home. Liam whispered, Now? Can we call you Dad? Jack nodded, pulling both boys close. He choked up. Dad, and always will be. 1 year later. A small wedding was held right in the garden behind the mansion. Twinkling yellow lights hung above, and the scent of lavender drifted on the breeze. Friends, neighbors, and a few of Jack's former coworkers quietly wiped tears as he walked Rachel down the aisle in a simple white dress, holding the hands of the twin boys tightly. Lucas handed over the rings. Liam read the vows from a handwritten note, his voice trembling. As the ring was placed, Jack whispered into Rachel's ear, "No past pain is too great to start over." She smiled and squeezed his hand. On the wedding table, a red toy car sat proudly under glass. A small sign beside it read, "This is where it all began. Second chances." Skoink. Final message. A single act of kindness, a sincere word, can open the door to a whole new life. Because sometimes what we need most isn't a perfect beginning, but a second chance.